Everyone mocked the silent Omega, until the Alpha King's wolf knelt before her without warning. In the Frostmoor Pack, Omegas did not speak in the council hall. They knelt at the edges of the room, they carried trays, they cleaned floors, and they disappeared into the walls the moment their work was done. That was the rule, and no one questioned it, because the rule had been true for longer than anyone alive could remember. Mira Ashwood had not spoken a single word in 15 years. It was not that she chose silence. Silence had chosen her, on the night her birth pack was destroyed, and she was the only one left standing in the snow. Something in her throat had closed that night, and never opened again. The healers said her body was fine. They said the wound was somewhere else, somewhere they could not reach with herbs or magic. So she learned to speak with her hands, with her eyes, with the small tilt of her chin that meant yes, and the flat stillness that meant no. Most of the pack had stopped trying to understand her years ago. It was easier to call her the mute one and move on. It was easier to forget she had a name at all. On the morning everything changed, Mira knelt near the back wall of the council hall with 3 other Omegas, waiting for the meeting to end so they could clear the cups and the papers and go back to their quiet, unnoticed lives. A noble's son named Corin, who liked to remind everyone of his rank whenever he had the chance, flicked his wrist and sent his cup clattering to the floor in front of her. "Pick it up," he said, smiling at his friends. "Let's see if she flinches." Mira did not flinch. She did not look at him at all. She reached down, lifted the cup, and set it upright on the table beside him, as calm as if she were arranging flowers. Corin's smile faltered, just slightly, before he turned back to his friends and pretended he had not expected anything different. Inside her, where no one could see, a small voice she never let out loud said, "Let them choke on it." That was the whole of her rebellion, a steady hand, a cup set down without a sound. The council meeting that day was not an ordinary one. Kael Voss, the Alpha King of Frostmoor, had come in person to settle a border dispute between 2 feuding families, and his presence changed the air in the room the way a storm changes the color of the sky before it arrives. Kael was 27 years old, and had ruled for 6 of those years, with a control so complete that most of the pack believed he had no wolf at all, only a mind that calculated and a voice that commanded. They did not know about the night, many years ago, when Kael's wolf had nearly taken his little sister's life in an uncontrolled shift. They did not know how many hours he had spent since then, learning to hold his instincts on a leash so tight that even his own advisors sometimes forgot he was not entirely human in his bones. Kael had built himself into a locked door. Nothing got in, nothing got out. He crossed the hall that day the way he crossed every hall, with his eyes fixed straight ahead and his shoulders set like a wall. He walked past the guards, he walked past the nobles, he walked past the row of kneeling Omegas without so much as a glance, because that was what an Alpha King did. He did not look down. Then he reached Mira, and his knee hit the floor. There was no warning, no stumble, no misstep, nothing that explained it. One moment Kael Voss was standing, and the next he was kneeling in front of a silent Omega girl, the way a subject kneels before someone far above his station, not the other way around. The whole hall stopped breathing at once. Kael felt it happen before he understood it. His wolf, the part of him he had locked away for a decade, had simply decided the leash did not apply anymore, and it had put him on the ground in front of her without asking his permission. He stayed there for one long second too many, his mind scrambling to catch up with his body, before he stood again, jaw tight, eyes unreadable. No one in the room said a word. Then someone at the back let out a short, ugly laugh, the kind of laugh people use when they need the world to make sense again. An Omega, a mute Omega. It cannot be real. Mira's hands moved before she could stop them, forming a single sign into the air between herself and the king. One word. Why? Kael did not answer. He did not have an answer. He turned and walked out of the hall as if nothing had happened, though everyone who had seen it knew that something enormous had just cracked open in front of them. Mira stayed kneeling exactly where she was. She did not look at the door where the king had gone. She looked instead at the cup Corin had thrown earlier, still sitting upright on the table where she had placed it, and she stared at it, as though it might explain something the rest of the room could not. The pack did not know what to do with what they had seen, so they did what packs always do with things they cannot explain. They talked about it in low voices, in corners, in places they thought Mira could not hear, though of course she could. Some said the king had simply lost his footing. Others said it was an old Omega trick, a kind of trap, though no one could explain how silence could trap anyone. A few, the ones brave enough to say it out loud, whispered the word that mattered most in wolf custom. Mate. Kael spent the rest of that day locked in his study, pacing a floor he had paced 1,000 times before, trying to talk himself out of what his own body had done. He told himself it was exhaustion. He told himself it was the stress of the border dispute, or a misstep on the old stone floor, or anything at all that did not require him to believe his wolf had chosen a mate without consulting him first. He had spent 10 years making sure his wolf never chose anything without his permission. That was the whole point of the leash. But when evening came, he found himself walking toward the Omega quarters anyway, telling himself it was only to apologize for the scene he had caused her in front of the council. That was the story he told himself. It was not entirely true. He found Mira alone in a small room near the kitchens, folding linens with the kind of care that suggested her hands needed something to do. She looked up when he entered, her face giving away nothing, the way it had given away nothing for 15 years. I wanted to explain, Kael said. What happened in the hall? It was not what it looked like. I lost my balance. Mira set down the linen she was holding. She did not sign anything. She simply looked at him, and something in that look made the excuse feel small and foolish, even as it left his mouth. His wolf, again without his permission, would not let him finish the lie. Before Kael understood what was happening, his knee was on the floor a second time, in the quiet of that small room, where no council and no whispering nobles could see. This time there was no crowd to explain it away for him. There was only Mira, standing very still, watching a king kneel in front of her with no audience left to perform for. I don't understand it, Kael said, and for the first time in years, his voice did not sound like a king's voice at all. It sounded like a man who had just discovered a door in himself he thought he had sealed shut long ago. Mira's anger came up in her then, sudden and clean and almost welcome, the way an old friend arrives just when you need them. It was easier to be angry than to be anything else. She had spent 15 years learning that anger was safer than hope, and hope was exactly what was standing in front of her now, wearing a crown and an apology that did not fit the moment. She signed something sharp and quick, something that would have scandalized the entire council if any of them had understood it, and then she turned back to her linens, as if the king of Frostmoor were not still kneeling on her floor. Kael almost laughed. It surprised him more than the kneeling had. I don't know what that meant, he admitted, rising to his feet, but I have a feeling I deserved it. For the first time since the incident in the hall, Mira allowed something close to amusement to cross her face, quick and gone, before it could be studied too closely. Over the following days, the pack watched the king and the silent Omega with a kind of nervous fascination that no one quite knew how to name. Kael found reasons to walk near the kitchens more often than any Alpha King reasonably needed to. Mira found herself less invisible than she had been in years, which felt less like a gift and more like standing in a spotlight she had never asked for. Corin and his friends, who had once thrown cups at her feet without a second thought, grew quieter whenever she passed. It was not respect exactly, not yet. It was the particular silence of people recalculating who they had been cruel to, and wondering, with some discomfort, whether that cruelty had just become very dangerous for them. Kael's advisors urged him to reconsider. An Omega was not a suitable match for an Alpha King, they said. It would weaken the throne. It would confuse the pack's order. Kael listened to all of it, and then he asked them a question none of them could answer. My wolf has never chosen anything without my permission. Not once, in 10 years, not even the night it nearly cost my sister her life. Tell me why it chose her, and I will listen to the rest of what you have to say. No one had an answer. There was no old law, no ancient custom, that explained why a wolf bound tightly for a decade would break its leash for a girl who had not spoken a word since childhood. There was only the plain fact of it, witnessed by an entire hall of nobles who could not unsee it, no matter how they whispered. It was Mira, in the end, who gave the pack something to understand, even if she never explained it in words. On the day the council reconvened to finish the business that had been interrupted, she walked into the hall on her own, without being summoned, and took the same cup that Corin had once thrown at her feet. She set it upright on the table in front of the entire council, exactly as she had the first time, calm and unhurried, as though reminding the room of exactly where all of this had started. Then she walked out first. Kael followed her, leaving the council mid-sentence, leaving his advisors staring after him with their objections still hanging unfinished in the air. He did not explain himself to them, because he did not owe them an explanation. His wolf had not asked permission, and for the first time in 10 years, Kael found that he did not need one either. Outside, in the cold morning air, Mira turned to face him, and for a long moment, neither of them said anything at all, because between them, words had never really been the point. The pack that had mocked her silence for 15 years would spend a long time learning to see her differently. Some would never fully manage it, but from that morning on, no one in Frostmoor ever again mistook Mira Ashwood's quiet for weakness, and no one ever again dared to throw a cup at her feet to see if she would flinch. She never did, not once, not even for a king.